In the world of Windia, maps were serious business. They were etched in brass and iron, measured to the millimeter, and represented only what could be seen, touched, and tallied: the precise placement of mines, the predictable run of the railway, the exact distance between one cold, industrial city and the next. There was no room for error, and certainly no room for dreams. Silas Finn was the chief cartographer of the Royal Survey. He was a man of clean lines and sharp graphite, with eyes that saw the world as a complex grid of facts. He was also a widower, and the world had lost its color for him when his wife, Ilara, an artist who loved the messy, swirling chaos of the sea, passed away. The capital city, Dales, reflected this mood. It was a masterpiece of utility, all soot-stained brick and smoke-choked air. Yet, every afternoon, precisely at 4:15, Silas would close his ledgers and walk to the high, dusty window of his office. He would look past the skeletal cranes and the iron foundries, and see not the city of fact, but a glimmer of the city his heart remembered. One day, while cataloguing a box of condemned survey tools, Silas found a small, leather-bound sketchbook, Ilara's last journal. It wasn't a log of her travels, but a chronicle of a place she called Ethelgard, the city of living light. The text was a poetic ramble. Ethelgard is not a place to be found, but a place to be believed. Its streets are paved with forgiveness. Its walls are built of shared laughter. And its central tower? The tower is the spire of pure, unspent hope. On the last page was a blank sheet with a single, faint, pencil-drawn circle, labeled simply, "The Beginning." Silas dismissed it as a final flight of romantic fancy. He tucked the book away, returned to his brass rulers, and continued to map the world of what is. Part 2. The quiet rebellion of the ink. But the circle, the beginning, had been a seed. A few months later, the king commissioned a new, monumental map of Dales, a masterpiece of utility, to hang in the Parliament Hall. It was to be Silas's career-defining work. Silas plunged into the work, spending weeks on the precise angles of the industrial district. Then, on a Tuesday, an inexplicable error appeared on his draft. Just off the official border of the city, where the map was meant to fade into empty parchment, the ink had formed a shape. It was a cluster of tight, spiraling lines that didn't follow the laws of Euclidean geometry. It was small, no bigger than a thumbnail, and looked like a tiny, intricate seashell. Silas scowled, assumed it was a spill, and scrubbed it out. The next day, it was back, darker this time, and now a tiny, impossible street seemed to sprout from its side, leading nowhere. He realized the unsettling truth: he had drawn it. He had done it while in a trance-like state, a subconscious echo of Ilara's impossible city. Driven by a strange mix of professional duty and private grief, Silas began a secret, second map, working late into the night. This was not the brass and iron masterpiece of utility, but the Atlas of Ethelgard. He worked with an almost furious dedication. He mapped the street of second chances, which looped back to its starting point but was never the same trip twice. He plotted the fountain of undiminished zeal, which lay at the intersection of effort and belief. He drew the theater of spontaneous laughter, an auditorium with no walls, only the open sky. He used inks mixed with pigments only Ilara would have known, crushed wildflowers for the color of forgiveness, and a dash of his own salty tea for regret. The lines of this map were not straight, they curved, folded over themselves, and occasionally vanished, only to reappear 1,000 miles away. It was a map that demanded not a ruler, but an open mind. Part 3. The discovery of the first citizen. The day before the official masterpiece of utility was due, Silas stood back from his secret map. It was glorious, a vibrant sprawl of impossible architecture that was an absolute antithesis to Isengrind. It was everything he missed about his wife, and everything he had let the world steal from him. He was interrupted by a knock. It was Pip, his young, perpetually anxious apprentice, whose job was to file reports and never, ever deviate from the king's protocol. "Chief Finn, you've worked too long. You should rest." "I've brought the final checklist for the masterpiece," Pip whispered, his eyes wide. As Pip shuffled his papers, his gaze fell on the vibrant, unrolled map of Ethelgard. His breath hitched. "Chief, what is this?" Silas, exhausted and resigned, told the truth. "This, Pip, is nothing. It is a foolishness. It is the map of the impossible city, a place with no coordinates, no real existence, a failure of cartography. Pip didn't hear him. He was tracing a winding, spiral road with a trembling finger. The path of unbroken curiosity, he read from a tiny, flowing script on the map. I feel like I've walked here. Look, Chief, the tower, the spire of hope. It's exactly how my mother used to describe her childhood home, which burned down years ago. Silas blinked. That's impossible, Pip. I drew this from my own imagination. And my wife's words. But look here, Pip insisted, pointing to a small, isolated square labeled the workshop of the quiet dreamer. That window, the one that faces the sunset, that's the one I used to stare out of when I was a boy, before I came to Cindertime to be practical. In that moment, a profound, chilling realization dawned on Silas. Ethelgard wasn't a fiction for him alone. It was an amalgamation of shared, lost human hope. It was the collective impossible city that people dreamed of when the world of Isengrind became too heavy. The map, by daring to exist, had charted not a physical place, but a spiritual truth. The next morning, Silas was summoned to the Parliament Hall. The king was waiting, flanked by the royal council. The space for the masterpiece of utility was ready. Chief Cartographer Finn, the king boomed, present the map that defines our empire. Silas walked forward. He held two map tubes. The heavy, polished brass tube contained the masterpiece of utility, the perfect, factual, lifeless map of Cindertime. The worn, leather-bound tube contained the Atlas of Ethelgard, the impossible, vibrant map of belief. He knew what to do, based on everything he had lived. Present the masterpiece, and secure his legacy, wealth, and continued life in the world of facts. He also knew what he needed to do, based on the silent joy he had seen in Pip's eyes. Silas took a deep breath, and unrolled the scroll in the leather tube. A hush fell over the room. The royal council saw only a kaleidoscope of impossible lines and unauthorized color. They saw a childish, useless rebellion. They began to murmur in outrage. But the king, a stern, tired man who had ruled Isengrind for 50 years of unrelenting fact, saw something different. He saw a tiny, winding stream that reminded him of a fishing spot he loved as a child, a spot he had forgotten existed. Chief Finn, the king said, his voice surprisingly soft. What is this, chaos? Silas stood tall. Your Majesty, this is the map of Ethelgard, the city of living light. It is the impossible city, built not of brick and iron, but of the things we forget when we only map what is visible: courage, beauty, and the memory of joy. He pointed to a small park on the map. This is the grove of resilient laughter. It is the memory of every happiness you thought was small, but which saved your life. He pointed to the main spire. This is the tower of unspent hope. It is the direction we must look if we are to rebuild Cindertime, not just for utility, but for spirit. The council called for his arrest, labeling him a traitor to geometry and order. But the king raised his hand. He looked at the map for a long time, then at the stunned cartographer. Silas Finn, the king declared, his voice firm. The facts of our world are cold. Your map is indeed impossible. But in a world of perfect utility, an impossible dream is the most essential thing we can possess. I cannot hang this map in the Parliament as a record of our present. But I decree that it be displayed here, in the hall, as the map of our potential. Let every citizen who looks upon it remember that the greatest treasures are often not what is found, but what is created. Epilogue: The New Compass. Silas was not jailed. He was not fired. He was appointed the first royal dreamer, tasked not with mapping new land, but with charting new possibilities. The masterpiece of utility was filed away. The Atlas of Ethelgard was framed and hung. At first, people scoffed. But soon, the workers, the merchants, and the tired officials of Cindertime began to visit the hall. They would stand before the vibrant, swirling map, and each one would see a different part of the city: a childhood swing set, a lost lover's gaze, a moment of profound peace. They saw their own forgotten truth reflected in the impossible city. The moral of Ethelgard was simple, and it was the core of Alara's final lesson to her husband: The world is not limited by what we can measure with a ruler, but by what we are willing to imagine with our heart. And so, Silas Finn, the cartographer of facts, became the cartographer of dreams, proving that sometimes, the greatest act of cartography is not to map the world that is, but to draw the impossible world that ought to be, and in doing so, inspire the first steps toward making it real.